Before we had antibiotics, people used to die of very silly things, routine wounds, infected wounds. If you had a staph infection, wound became infected through childbirth or standing on a garden fork or something silly, or your appendix burst and they had to do abdominal surgery. Once you get Staph aureus into your bloodstream, the mortality is about 80% if you don't have an antibiotic. And MRSA, we do have quite inadequate provision. The antibiotics we have now are not nearly as efficacious or well tolerated as penicillins are. So when you have to use unsatisfactory antibiotics intravenously to treat these difficult infections, you can see once we start running out of those, there isn't going to be much left if the antibiotics we have to use currently are toxic, poorly absorbed, and have to be given intravenously. And they also cause damage to kidney tissue. So that's the best antibiotic we have for treating invasive MRSA infections. So the future of antibiotic resistance is quite a poor and gloomy one. For various reasons, investment in new antibiotics is at quite a low level. Okay, so the problems with antibiotic resistance in human ecosystems is that multi-drug resistance may lead to untreatable cases. So this is the nightmare scenario. There are some cases of gram-negative bacteria, thankfully not for MRSA, where we don't have any antibiotics to treat those. ESBLs are going that way, but there are other less common hospital infection bacteria, which are less aggressive, but they're much more resistant to antibiotics. And these were inherently resistant organisms which have picked up antibiotic resistance genes from other organisms. So these bacterial species all talk to each other in terms of DNA switching and plasmids, insertion sequences and so on. So there's lots of crosstalk between members of the same species of bacteria, but also between different species of bacteria. Okay, so if you've got an infection and you're given the wrong antibiotic to start off with, basically take a couple of days for that to find out. If you've got sepsis due to an antibiotic-resistant infection, that's basically 2 days of sepsis before you're given the correct antibiotic, if indeed you are given that. So we do know that antibiotic resistance increases hospital stays. The longer you stay in hospital, the more antibiotics you're going to get. That's going to increase your morbidity, mortality, and also the cost to the NHS, which we all know about. Alternative antibiotics, if they exist, in a lot of cases they don't. They may be more toxic, they're less effective, or more expensive. Usually all of these because they would have been frontline or second-line therapies rather than tertiary therapies. Also, I came across colonised seagulls, so wild animals, with multi-drug resistant E. coli, including ESBL E. coli. I think the more you look into this, the more surprised you are. I mean, animal infections are not my primary field of expertise, but I knew there was lots of antibiotic resistance in farmed animals. I didn't realise that we're also mixing into wild type in wild animals. Okay, so this is where we were in the early 90s. MRSA was a little bit of a nuisance in UK hospitals. We didn't really have a proactive, preventative approach to this like they did in the Netherlands and Scandinavian countries. So what happened here, this was increasing up to about 45% of our bloodstream staph infections became MRSA, peaking out in about 2001, 2002. This is not a change in how we're treating infections, this is a change in the ecology. These are the emergence of 2 new types of MRSA, which account for more than 95% of blood infections in UK hospitals now. So these 2 types of MRSA, first seen in 1991, 92, they're in every hospital in the UK now. If you have an MRSA bacteremia, it'll be either one type or the other type. And we've exported these to other countries quite successfully as well. There has been control since John Reid announced new guidelines to reduce MRSA infections. But this is never going to get back down to here. We're going to level out maybe 30, 40%. But other countries, like Japan I mentioned earlier, the US, 50%, Japan perhaps 80% of these infections will be MRSA in this lab. This is, early on, this is a study looking at this new type of MRSA, sequence type 398, which I'm going to talk about for the rest of our talk. Dog infections, mainly pig colonizations. This is where they picked up first in the Netherlands, because if you're looking for MRSA and you find it in the Netherlands, you're very surprised. They have single number cases in most parts of the Netherlands. So when they have clusters of cases, they do really stand out. So I think the theory is that there's lots of pig colonization, but not very much pig disease. That's not strictly true. You do, like pigs, they're like humans, and all mammals which can carry Staph aureus and therefore can carry MRSA. You tend to get skin infections, and pig skin infections with ST398 is becoming increasingly common. But we're also seeing diseases in horses, pigs, and so on. So the potential for MRSA to spread into all mammals which are routinely colonized with MRSA, with Staph aureus rather, for them to become infected with MRSA is quite a small step. Okay, I just want to, at the end here, there is a lot of, this is basically what we know about the species of Staph aureus. This is a genetic method that we've devised in human disease. But we do think that these are pig-adapted strains that can cause disease in humans. Some of these other ones are specific human strains. A lot of these are human strains, and some of them can colonize one or the other. But I think the 398 is becoming increasingly drug resistant and increasingly genetically diverse. The genetic diversity of this strain in such a short time does mean it's under a lot of evolutionary pressure. And I think the potential for this to perhaps cause an epidemic in human disease, like we saw with MRSA in our hospitals, is something that is one of the main sources of danger for human health from antibiotic resistance bacteria. Okay. I'll just stop there actually, because if you have a second, I'm out of time.
Can a little bit more be done to explain whether this is just in pigs, whether it is going to affect humans, and how it could cross the channel to Britain?
What we do know about MRSA is that everything's everywhere. It's only a matter of time really before it's going to spread into the UK. What we do know is that this is a type of MRSA that's competing with the wild flora. Once that happens, it might be like penicillin resistance in staph, emerged within 2 years, and now 95%, probably more than that, of infections are resistant to penicillin within the species. So the Staph aureus MRSA, they're very good at taking things in. They don't tend to lose them with time. So you talk about a ratcheting of antibiotic resistance.